Good morning. Begin our Bible class this morning. Good to see everybody here. Before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Father, so thankful for this day you blessed us with, Father. I'm grateful for this Lord's Day and grateful for the opportunity we have, Father, to assemble together in this Bible class hour, and grateful for the opportunity to study your word together, Father. And Pray as we study your word this morning, Father, that we can be good stewards of your word, and we'll always rightly divide it, Father, and study in a way that we can always be pleasing to you, Father, in the lessons we draw and the things we study from your word, Father. And pray for your forgiveness for any sins that are missed in our life, Father. Help us to always live according to your will, and pray for your blessings upon all those that are sick or hurting, and I'm grateful for those that have been able to return to us, Father, and we pray for your kingdom blessings upon all those that need those prayers on their behalf, Father, and pray for your blessings upon us as we go into the worship hour shortly as well, Father, and pray that everything we do in that portion is pleasing to you and done in spirit and in truth. And again, pray for your blessings upon us as we go into this Bible class hour this morning, Father, and pray that we can study your word, Father, and rightly divide it. Again, thank you for all the blessings you've given us in Jesus' name. Amen. So we'll continue our study this morning in Matthew chapter 23 with Jesus' woes to the Pharisees, to the scribes and Pharisees. This morning we'll be looking at woe number 4, which is hypocritical oaths. So as we read through this context or these verses, my first thought is that they don't seem to be terribly self-explanatory at first glance. When you first read through them, you kind of understand what Jesus is saying, but I guess the basis to his argument, or I guess the basis of what he is saying is at least was not abundantly clear to me at first glance. You understand he's talking about swearing by certain things, but I think as we study it and we look into context, the understanding becomes much, much clearer. We understand what Jesus is saying. But beginning in Matthew chapter 23, verse 16, Jesus says, "Woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, Whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? Whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing. But whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whoso therefore shall swear by the altar, sweareth by it, and by all things thereon. And whoso shall swear by the temple, sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that shall swear by heaven, sweareth by the throne of God, by him that sitteth thereon." So Jesus is rebuking the scribes and Pharisees for taking hypocritical oaths, and he's exposing the foolish logic in their way of thinking as far as how they're justifying giving these hypocritical oaths. But basically what the practice was is that they would take an oath, say for example, to swear by the temple, which they viewed the temple itself for some reason as inferior to the gold of the temple. So they might swear by the temple, but they viewed that as nothing or something that's not important. So in their mind, they were not bound by the oath that they had taken, because they swore by something that was not, they swore by something that was inferior or something that was not of importance. They viewed the temple as not of importance, but for some reason the gold of the temple was important to them. So I guess if you wanted to give the appearance that that you're going to swear by something or you're going to do something, they would purposely swear by the temple instead of the gold of the temple, so that they would not be bound by that oath. Basically, it was just a way for them to, it was a cop-out for the scribes and the Pharisees, a way they could justify themselves not being bound by the oaths that they had taken. Really, in my mind, it's basically the equivalent of putting your fingers behind your back and crossing your fingers. As a kid, you might do that, and you say, "Well, my fingers were crossed. I'm not bound by that." Really, it's the same principle. Why make an oath anyway if you're not going to be bound by that? What's the purpose of making an oath against something that you deem as not important, or something that's not going to be binding to the oath that you're taking? Why take the oath at all? But I think it goes back to what we've seen throughout this chapter with Jesus' woes to the scribes and Pharisees is that everything was to be seen of men, right? They wanted to receive the praise of men. So maybe they wanted to make an oath, and it's most likely based on the other things we've seen. Everything was done very publicly, in the eyes of people so that they could receive the praise. So I guess I could see, based on the context here of Matthew 23 and kind of what we've seen as Jesus rebuking the scribes and Pharisees, is that most likely I would imagine that they would take an oath in front of a bunch of people or something publicly, so that they could receive this praise. Oh, he's swearing to do this certain thing, but they would purposely swear by something that they viewed as inferior, so that their oath was not. They were end up not being bound by that oath. That's the only reason I could see that would justify. Why would you do that? Why even take an oath if you're not going to keep the oath, unless it was in order to receive some praise for that or some kind of recognition for that. But I think that fits the characterization that Jesus is making of the scribes and Pharisees in this chapter. Everything they did was for the praise of men. But the things that he mentions here, so he mentions specifically, praying by the temple or swearing by the temple, but not the gold of the temple, or swearing by the altar, but not the gift that is on the altar. And these seem to be specific examples of what the scribes and Pharisees would do in Jesus' day in the first century. In fact, there's some evidence from first century writings, outside the Bible, that a lot of pagan peoples did not trust the Jews because of this practice. So they knew that they tended to not keep their oaths because they would take their oaths by something that they deemed as inferior. So sometimes the pagans would insist that they would, if you take an oath against a pagan to do something, maybe a debt or something, they would want you to swear by Jupiter or one of their gods or something that they deemed as important, because they probably wouldn't be able to tell if the temple was important to you or if it was the gold of the temple or whatever. So there's some evidence that suggests that there was some distrust for the Jews by some Gentiles and pagan people, and that if they needed to enter into an oath, that those pagan people would insist that the Jews would swear by the pagan god, because at least the pagans knew that that was binding to them at least. But what's important to notice, and we'll see this as we go through these verses this morning, but what's important to notice is that Jesus is not necessarily trying to correct the method that they're swearing by. He's not trying to say, he's not necessarily saying, don't swear by the temple, but swear by the gold, or don't swear by the altar, but swear by the gift, because those are the things that are important. He's not doing that. He's really rebuking their hypocritical actions, and he's showing the foolishness in the justification that they're giving. Jesus has already back in Matthew chapter 5. We'll look at it in this lesson. Basically, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. So that was one of the things that Jesus preached in his Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus is not correcting necessarily the method that they're using. He's not trying to say, well, make sure that you swear by the gold, or make sure that you swear by the gift that's on the altar. He's rebuking this entire hypocritical action, these hypocritical oaths. And what we'll see is basically, instead of taking these hypocritical oaths, what you should do is let your yes be yes and your no be no. But I think we can see in Hebrews chapter 6, really the fundamental principle on what an oath is, on which an oath is held to be binding, is laid down here in Hebrews chapter 6. Starting in verse number 13, it says, "For when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, Surely blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thee. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise," talking about Abraham. "For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife." So the fundamental principle of an oath is that there's an ultimate appeal to divine authority in order to ratify some assertion, right? And that's really what we're saying, that there's to ratify this assertion. And the divine authority is called on in two ways. First, it's to witness to the truth of what's being sworn, and then secondly, to punish any falsehood if any is associated with what is being sworn. So I think there's, it's really, I guess there's an inherent distrust, I guess, associated with an oath, so that there's, to ensure that you're being honest, or to ensure that you're going to uphold your part of the bargain, and to ensure that I'm going to uphold my part of the bargain, we take an oath where we make this appeal to divine authority, where we both know that not only is the divine authority going to witness to the truth, but he's also going to punish any falsehood. That gives, peace of mind to both parties. But honestly, the principle of taking an oath really goes all the way back to the Old Testament. Numbers chapter 30, starting in verse number 1, says, "And Moses spake unto the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. If a man vow a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth." So really, that's, when it comes down to it, this is really the fundamental principle of an oath, is that you do what you say you're going to do. He shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth. We understand that. That's really the purpose of an oath. Actually, the oldest recorded instance I think we have of an oath is the one taken by Abraham and given to the king of Sodom. In Genesis chapter 14, verse 21, says, "And the king of Sodom said unto Abraham, Give me the persons, and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. Save only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men which went with me, Ener, Eshel, Mamre, let them take their portion." But Abraham swears an oath to the king of Sodom, basically that he has not, mistaken, he has not falsely taken, or that he has not taken any spoils from. This is when he goes to rescue Lot. So Abraham has taken making an oath to the king of Sodom, saying, I have not kept any spoils for myself other than what he's listed out. He's saying he's swearing that he's given the king of Sodom those spoils. But back in Hebrews chapter 6, let me go back. Notice it says, verse 16, "For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife." So what does it mean for this to be an end of all strife? It's because there's some peace of mind. The oath brings some peace of mind to each party. So the appeal to the divine authority gives peace of mind, so that not only is what the oath is taken, not only is it truthful, but also any falsehood associated will be punished. So the idea being that there's some peace of mind to each party. Each party has sworn to a power that is above themselves, and this power is able to punish them, if there's any falsehood associated with it. So in Genesis chapter 21, starting in verse number 22, it says Abraham, he takes an oath with Abimelech, and we'll see that this, after the oath, there seems to be trust on both parties' behalf due to the oath. Starting in verse number 22, "It came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phechol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son. But according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. And And Abimelech said, I wot not who hath done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. Wherefore he called the place Beersheba, because there they swore both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up and fetched all the chief captain of his hosts, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba and called thereon the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. But so there was an oath taken, a covenant between Abraham and Abimelech. And Abraham raised the dispute about this well of water. But it seems to, show that the covenant, the oath, ended any potential strife in between the two, because once they had sworn an oath, then there was, there was peace of mind on each other's behalf. Sort of similarly in Genesis chapter 47, this is Jacob, talking to Joseph, says, but I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, swear unto me. And he swore unto him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. So this is Jacob, asking Joseph to take his body back to be buried in the land of Canaan. At first Joseph says, I will do this. And then Jacob asked him, well, swear unto me that you're going to do this. And so Joseph, swears unto him that he will take his body back and bury it in the land of Canaan. It says, and then Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head, seemingly that he had some peace of mind associated with that, because now Joseph has sworn unto him. He's taken an oath to do so. So I think that's the meaning of to end all strife. There's some peace of mind associated with the oath, or at least there should be some peace of mind associated with the oath. The fact of the matter being, with the scribes and Pharisees, the entire practice of hypocritical oaths they were doing was that there ended up being no peace of mind associated with the oath. But the general practice being that there's some peace of mind associated with the oath. So going back to Matthew chapter 23, first we'll look at the practice of swearing to the temple, or the gold in the temple. Starting in verse number 16, Jesus says, woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing. Whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And then jumping down to verse 21, whoso shall swear by the temple sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. So notice that Jesus points out that they call swearing by the temple nothing, or of no importance, but yet swearing by the gold of the temple makes one a debtor. And verse number 16, at the end of that, he says, he is a debtor. So the word for debtor means to owe, or to be bound, to be under obligation, bound by duty or necessity. The English Standard Version translates this verse number 16, as woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. So the meaning there being that if I swear by the temple, I'm not bound by my oath. If I swear by the gold of the temple, then I'm bound by my oath. But so it's not hard to see, the logical fallacy here in what the scribes and the Pharisees were doing. Jesus points that out. Which one is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? Which one is greater? The temple was to be the dwelling place of God. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 5, it says, but unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. So the temple was a dwelling place of God. And that's what sanctified the temple. That's what sanctified the gold of the temple. It's not that the temple or the gold had any power or authority or sanctification outside of the fact that this was God's dwelling place among his people, right? Without Without God, without His authority, without God's sanctification, the temple is just a building. And the gold is it's just gold. So even though there's some value associated, some earthly value associated with gold, we understand the preciousness of it, as a precious metal. But as far as being sanctified, the gold itself in the temple, the only reason they were sanctified in any way is because they were part of the temple, or they were part of the dwelling place of God. That is the place that God had put His name to dwell among His people. So you can see that trying to make a distinction between the temple and the gold of the temple really made no sense. It was solely just a cop out for the scribes and Pharisees, a way for them to get out of being bound by their oaths. Right, that's true. Right. 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 Yeah, I think that's interesting. You think about, you put your hand on the Bible. I mean, that should give some kind of. We should view that as meaningful, I guess, in a way. But it's on. If you don't follow what the Bible says, then maybe the Bible is just a book. But if you take it in, as a Christian should, and live by it, well then, I guess that's sort of the same distinction we can, at least to me, about the temple and the gold. How is it sanctified? Well, this is to somebody who does. If they don't believe it, or maybe they don't plan on following, maybe it's just a book. But to us, it's our guide, right? So, but anyway, yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit at the end about when Jesus says, "Let your yes be yes, no be no," what does that mean to us as Christians, and how does that apply to some things, in our society today? But notice that Jesus calls them blind guides. This is the same word used by the Apostle Peter to describe those who lack the Christian graces in 2 Peter 1, verse 5 through 9. But the word literally means mentally blind. So 2 Peter chapter 1, starting verse number 5, Peter says, "Besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, to patience godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity. For if these things be in you and abound, they make you that ye shall neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. For he that lacketh these things is blind, and cannot see afar off, and hath forgotten that he was purged from his old sins." So the word blind has a sort of a figurative definition, figurative meaning of being mentally blind. Not that you physically can't see, but that you mentally can't see. It's also the same word used for the church in Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3, verse number 14 says, unto the angel of the church of Laodiceans write, "These things saith the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Because thou sayest, I am rich and increased with goods, and have need of nothing, and knowest that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked." Again, blind there being mentally blind. I think both of these passages, 2 Peter chapter 1 and Revelation chapter 3, are good commentaries on the character of the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23. So they certainly were not practicing the Christian graces that Peter lists in 2 Peter chapter 1. But also the attitude of the church at Laodicea that we see here in verse number 17. I am rich, increased with goods, have need of nothing. So there was some level of contentment with them that they didn't need anything, but yet it's been pointed out to them that they're wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. So they thought they had all they needed, but Jesus points out how destitute they actually were for their lukewarmness. The scribes and Pharisees had become spiritually destitute to the point that they purposely took these false oaths, so that they were not, bound by what they were saying. But this whole time they thought they were justified in their actions. So they had become so spiritually destitute that they didn't even see, ultimately didn't even see the sinfulness or the wrongfulness in what they were doing. To them, it was utterly justifiable to make an oath and then not follow that oath, as long as you didn't swear by a certain thing. So the word for guides also means a leader of the way. This is the same word that's translated as leaders in Matthew chapter 15, verse 14, when Jesus said, "Let them alone, they be blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch." So the word for guide means leader of the way. It has a figurative implication that infers a self-righteous piety, in that while themselves being destitute of a knowledge of the truth, they offer themselves as teachers of others. So I think that really describes in a nutshell the scribes and the Pharisees. You talk about a self-righteous piety. That's really ultimately what we see with the scribes and the Pharisees, this self-righteous piety. They appear to be pious because of their works, or they want to appear to be pious because of their works, but ultimately it's all a self-righteous act for them. It's all about pleasing themselves and receiving the glory of men. So they might portray themselves as being, knowledgeable of the truth, but ultimately they're so destitute that they don't see the sinfulness in what they're doing, but now they're also teaching others. So they offer themselves to be teachers of others. As we know, the scribes and the Pharisees would have been, the teachers of the day. But the idea of a guide, a blind guide, and here the blind leading the blind, I think definitely fits the characterization of the Pharisees that we're seeing here.
I think we see a classic example of what they were doing. They were taking God's law and word and the oath and twisting it to make it fit what they wanted it to say.
Right.
Just to make it look good.
Yep.
Well, we see the same principle in the world today. People twisting the scripture, make it say what they want it to say.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that's a good lesson, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 5 here in a little bit in oaths, but if you go through Matthew chapter 5, it's a lot of Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is sort of correcting all the things that have been twisted out of sorts, and this being one of them. But you're right. There's a good lesson for us today as far as twisting the Word of God to fit what we want it to fit. That's one reason why it's important. It's easy for us to study the Bible, not just us, but anybody in the world. There's so many religious denominations and theories and all kind of thoughts and doctrines that are floating around, that it's easy to read the Bible from a biased standpoint. If we go to the Bible searching solely for proof to support what we want it to support, then you might find it. You have to be careful because you might find it. But it doesn't mean that what you found is right. You could have, like what Ed said, you could be twisting it to fit what you want it to fit. To me, you think about things like, I think about the doctrine of premillennialism, for example. If you go to the Bible searching for the idea of a 1,000-year reign, then you can find what you believe, what you think is evidence of that. in that whole doctrine. Doesn't mean that the Bible fits that doctrine. Things like faith only. Somebody the other day, maybe it was Kenny in Bible class, was talking about watching some videos. And I've done the same. If you go to YouTube, you can find a lot of people giving a lot of quote unquote biblical evidence for faith only, right? So there's a lot of ways you could twist the word and make it fit the way that you want it to fit. And I don't think necessarily that doesn't necessarily imply that everybody is as spiritually destitute as the scribes and Pharisees, but it's a lesson to us to be careful. I think as we study, especially us as teachers, are we going through the Bible solely to find support for the things we want it to say, or are we sincerely trying to determine what God has set forth? So that's a good lesson for us. So notice that so not only does Jesus call them blind guides, they're mentally blind, they're spiritually destitute, they're destitute of the knowledge of the truth, but he also calls them fools. This is the same word used in Matthew chapter 7, verse 26, for the foolish man who built his house upon the sands. So you think about, what does it mean to be foolish in this context? It means to be imprudent or have no forethought or wisdom, acting and showing no care for the future. So this is, you think about the foolish man who built his house upon the sand. He acted imprudently, we'd call it. He acted foolishly, which is he had no forethought or wisdom for the future. He didn't think about the future. He just thought, let me build my house, but he didn't think about the rains coming and washing his house away. But this is the same word that Jesus used to describe the scribes and Pharisees. They were foolish to care for the future. This is in reference to the absurdity of this irrational practice that they were involved in, which is hypocritical oaths. These hypocritical oaths were foolish in that they gave no thought for the future, I guess. So to say that the scribes and Pharisees had no forethought of the future, we could see that, for example. They were teachers to the people, were supposed to be teachers to the people. As a teacher, you should have a reputation as honest, but we already mentioned how there's some evidence to support that pagans outside of the Jewish religion, Gentiles and those around, already had some distrust for the Jews because of this practice of the hypocritical oaths. So they gave no forethought to what does this mean to the integrity of them as teachers, or maybe their personal integrity, or even the integrity of their nation, to the outside nation. Secondly, they gave no forethought to their own future state. For example, hypocritical oaths were obviously against God's will, and they twisted whatever they needed to twist to justify it, so that they could so they could practice it. But all this was really a thinly veiled attempt to just do what they wanted to do, ultimately, really what they're doing. But they gave no real thought to the effect that this would have them in the future, talking about it eternally. So they gave no forethought to physical here on earth, the consequences of that, and they gave no forethought to the consequences eternally. That God is going to hold them accountable for these hypocritical oaths that they're doing. But due to their offices, their occupations, and the educations of the scribes and Pharisees, we've talked about that in past lessons, how the Jewish society in the first century was structured and the roles of the scribes and Pharisees. But due to their offices, they should have known well the principles of an oath, and ideally, them as being teachers and having levels of authority, some being on the Sanhedrin, ideally they would have been examples to the people in trustworthiness, and integrity. But instead, it was the opposite. Instead, they were so spiritually destitute that they could not see the sinfulness in their own actions. They instead justified these hypocritical oaths, however they could. So going back to Matthew 23, starting in verse number 18, Jesus talks about gifts on the altar. He says, "Whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing. But whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. You fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? He that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God and by him that sitteth thereon. So Jesus gives a similar rebuke for swearing by the altar or the gift on the altar. It's the same premise we looked at regarding the temple and the golden temple. Which one is worth more? Which one is more sanctified? The altar itself, the altar of God, or the sacrifice that was on the altar? You got the same, irrational justification applied here. But Jesus is given a similar rebuke. In verse number 18, where it says he is guilty, that's the same word that was translated as debtor in verse number 16. So it's the same concept. If you swear by the gift of the altar, the gift that is upon the altar, now you're bound by your oath, but not if you swear by the altar itself. So the same logical fallacy, is present here for swearing by the altar or the gift upon the altar. But elsewhere in Scripture, we find Jesus' command regarding oaths. We alluded to this earlier, Matthew chapter 5. These are the commands Jesus gives in His Sermon on the Mount, and these are, obviously what we should follow today as Christians. Matthew chapter 5, starting verse number 33, says, Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is His footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is sort of correcting. If we went through Matthew chapter 5, right before this, he does a similar thing to the idea of marriage and divorce. So Jesus has taken some of the Old Testament laws or some of the commands of God that have been twisted, and he's sort of correcting the twisting that has been made. Right before this, he did it for marriage and divorce. Now he's doing it for the taking of oaths. But he's sort of teaching, I think what most people would agree is really just a fundamental principle of religion. That's to be honest. He's telling us just really ultimately just to be honest. Let your communication be yea, yea, or nay, nay. But we as Christians should always tell the truth. We shouldn't have to swear by anything. We shouldn't have to swear to God or swear by the temple or Jerusalem or anything that is deemed precious, because in order to make our oath valid, or make our word valid, instead, we should just be honest people, in that if we say something or say we're going to do something, then we hold ourselves accountable to it just because we said we would do it. Not that we have to have some oath or we have to swear to something in order for us to be bound by our word. We should be bound by our word anyway, just because we're true and honest people. James gives a similar command in James chapter 5, verse 12. He says, But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. So I think ultimately Jesus, and now James is basically repeating the words of Jesus. I think Jesus was reiterating the purpose of the original command given in Numbers chapter 30, verse 2. We looked at that earlier, which was basically do what you say you're going to do. Ultimately, when God gave that command to His people in Numbers chapter 30 and verse 2, the idea was to do what you say you're going to do, and that's really what it was. And the practice had been twisted by the scribes and Pharisees to be hypocritical, but really it's just do what you say you're going to do.
I think, like from my perspective, I'm telling you I'm going to do something, but then I feel obligated that I need to go above and beyond and tell you, I swear on this or that I'm going to do this. That's a reflection on me, because I may feel like you think I'm untrustworthy, and I've got to say something else, something special.
Right.
say these other things, or is my character enough, my Christian character that other people see? They know if I say that I'm going to do something, that I'm going to give, unless something extremely, major happens out of my control, I'm going to make that happen.
Right.
I'm doing my very best to make that happen. And if it doesn't happen, then you know there was something else that's going on. Maybe I need to check.
Right.
I mean, that's just the.
Maybe you need to swear next time.
Yeah.
You know, you've probably heard Joe talk about his word is bond.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something also tells you something, his word is bond. You bank on what he tells you.
Right.
We don't always make a bold statement sometimes, but we need to have a trigger to be his Lord's will, that we is that. But then if we make a strong statement, I'm going to do this or that, and if something happens that we can't do, we need to notify the person.
Right. Yeah.
Told that to
Yeah. Right. Well, that's true. Really, all these comments really, that's really what we're talking about. Is the whole purpose is to do what you say you're going to do. You don't just when you give your word you're going to do something. That's all you need. You don't have to swear by something to assure somebody you're going to do what you're going to do. Now there's things that are out of our control, but I think the distinction we can make is that our intention is to do what we said we're going to do. Now, if something happens, maybe we have to go back to that person and say, hey, I was going to do this, but something else has come up, and maybe I can continue to what I said, or maybe I can't. Maybe I got to put it off. But I guess the purpose of the intention is that your intention is to do what you said you're going to do. The scribes and Pharisees, their intention was to not do what they said they were going to do from the get-go, right? But yeah, those are all those comments hit exactly what we're talking about this morning. But I think we see it as basically a fundamental practice of religion, which is just to be honest. I think everybody would say that. If anybody that's in the world, whether they're a Christian or not, I think they would understand that basic concept of Christianity is to be honest people. Right. Yeah. That's how we should be, really. So. Right. Right. Yeah, I think we can make a distinction, or at least in my mind, because one question comes up to me when we talk about this. We say, don't swear. Jesus said, "Let your yea be yea, and let your nay be nay." So, how does that work in a court of law? If you go to court, they're going to ask you to put your hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth, right? Or when you get married, you stand up before everybody and you give these vows to death do us part. So you probably can. I think the distinction we can make, though, is that, and it might be, at least this is in my mind, and it's sort of a confusing concept, but I think if you take, is there a difference between an oath and a vow? So an oath would be, especially in the context we're talking about here this morning, an agreement between two people that sort of invokes, divine authority, or is done in the presence of some divine authority, in order to be a witness to this oath, and also to punish any falsehood associated with it. So I think there's that inherent idea of distrust And the oath is there in order to put both parties at ease that that both of us are going to do what we say we're going to do. But I think if you make the distinction between an oath and a vow, then a vow would be something that's made directly to God, for example. And take, for example, marriage vows. Marriage vows are made to the other person for sure, obviously, but they're done. You're really taking your marriage vow in front of God, making a vow to God. God instituted the institution of marriage, right? He instituted marriage to begin with. He's the one that set forth the confines of the marriage. So to me, the vow being that you're going to be faithful to your spouse is done to the spouse for sure, but also to God in the fact that God was the one that set forth the marriage institution to begin with. I think we probably make the same argument for if you go to court. Could you put your hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth? Well, God instituted civil governments. The purpose of the civil governments is to punish crime. Basically, we should be telling the truth anyway. And I think as Christians, if we're living a Christian life, we should be honest anyway. So, is there anything wrong with taking a vow, putting your hand on the Bible? To swear to tell the truth in a court of law. I think if we make a distinction between an oath and a vow was made directly to God, where an oath is made between two people invoking, some kind of divine authority to give each other peace of mind. At least that's how I see it, with the difference being a vow is not the same as an oath. I know that's a confusing concept, and I might be out of whack on that, but right. Right. It's you think about it, if we're not supposed to make an oath, how would you justify something like a marriage, right? Are you taking an oath when you're married? You're taking a vow to be faithful. So, I look at it from that standpoint that if marriage was instituted by God, that you're partaking, you're making a vow, but your vow is really going to God ultimately, because God is the institutor of marriage. Lord, do you have a comment? That's right, yeah. Right. Ultimately, it's the intent of the person, right? And you don't, and I guess really what we're getting as Christians, we shouldn't have to put our hand on the Bible and swear that we're going to tell the truth. We should just tell the truth. It comes down to it. It's not that we're telling the truth because we did put our hand on the Bible. We're telling the truth because that's right.
I think it's legally documented as far as the court is concerned. This is everything up to this point is not documented as going in the notes or whatever, how they keep track of it. It's not going down in writing that such and such is going to give us the true story, the details and truth. I think that's
yeah. Well, I think there's some public formal aspect of a vow. Marriage being the same way. It's the public. Ultimately, you wouldn't have to do that, right? Just because you stand up and take marriage vows doesn't. If you don't do that, it don't mean that the marriage vows are not there. It's just really some kind of public. Right. Yeah.